in the middle of a tantrum is not the time to teach a child huge life lessons. For Children's Mental Health Week this year, I thought it would be important to do a video all about how to help children understand and manage their emotions. Teaching children about emotions is essential for positive emotional and mental well-being. So if you want some easy children's mental health tips that you can start doing today, keep watching. One of the most important things to understand is that how we react as parents, carers and teachers, the way that we respond to our children's emotions, has a huge impact on how their emotional intelligence develops. If we can bring ourselves to adopting this into our core values, then we'll be able to appreciate how essential it is for us to actively take steps to teach children the skills they need to understand and manage their emotions. Another thing to note before I get into the tips is that your role isn't to remove your child's emotions, it's to help them manage it. Sometimes as parents or carers, it can be really hard for us to see our kids going through a hard time. Sometimes we just want to prevent them from feeling negative emotions altogether. But once we accept negative emotion as a normal part of being human and realize that it serves an important functioning in our children becoming who they are, then we can get comfortable with them experiencing difficult emotions, and then we can jump straight into these tips. The first thing you can do to help teach your child about emotions is to label the emotion. So children have 8 primary inbuilt emotions, meaning that children experience these emotions without anybody teaching it or modeling it to them. These are anger, sadness, fear, joy, interest, surprise, disgust, and shame. And you can start this from when they're babies. If your child is sad, you can say, "I know you're sad." If they're feeling scared, you can ask, "Are you feeling scared?" Also, if they're laughing and enjoying something, you can say, "You're so happy." Children just know that they're feeling something, but they don't always know what that emotion is. So by labeling the emotion, you're helping them to identify and understand what they're feeling, which will then lay the groundwork for anything else that you build on top of it. This one has worked brilliantly for my 2-year-old, to the point where she will now tell me that she's angry if I've told her she can't have ice cream before bed. Or if someone's having an emotional response to something on TV, she's now able to correctly identify what their emotion is. If your child is older, you can still do this, but you might then want to bring in a greater range of emotions like hurt, disappointment, intrigue, etc. The next thing you can do, and this can work really well for older children and teenagers, is kind of building on from the point before about labeling the emotion, but it's to feel the emotion with them. Often when children feel indifferent towards a situation, they won't say anything about it. But when they're happy, frustrated, disheartened, that's when they'll bring it to you. So just taking a moment to feel the emotion with them will not just help them to understand their feeling, but it will also validate the emotions as legitimate ones, and in turn strengthen your relationship with the child as well. So for example, if your child has come home and they failed an exam that they've been working really hard on, before you provide them with the support and reassurance, you could say something like, "I know this feels really disappointing and frustrating." Or if your child got in trouble at school for something they felt they didn't do, you can say, "This feels really unfair," and then go on to explore what happened with them. Tip number 3 is to become best friends with the phrase, "use your words." One thing I started doing with my daughter from pretty much the moment I knew she was able to verbalize her thoughts was encourage her to use her words to communicate something with me. Sometimes when she's immersed into a TV program and then an ad break comes on, she'd throw herself on the floor whinging hysterically, and I would say, "Use your words. What do you want?" And she does. She'll say, "I want my program," or "don't like advert." This technique diverts your child's attention away from the tantrum and encourages them to find other ways of explaining their thoughts and feelings. This can work great with slightly older children too. When they don't seem to be regulating their emotions well, encourage them to use their words to explain or describe to you what they're thinking and feeling. I've got some tips for encouraging openness through nonverbal communication as well, but I'll talk about those a bit later. Tip number 4, validate their emotions. Emotional invalidation prevents kids from learning how to manage their emotions. Really let that sink in. Don't tell them things like, "I had it worse," or "other people have it worse than you." Think about it. You may have been through a really tough time, but there may be other people in the world who have had it worse than you. But that doesn't make your feelings about what you went through any less serious. Other things not to say are, "It's not that serious, that's nothing to get upset about." Or even comparing the way that this child responds to how another child or someone else responds. All of these are a big no-no. In fact, I'll actually think I'll do a video on how to stop gaslighting your kids, because I think this is a whole topic within itself. Tip number 5, have a low stimulus place for them where they can go to when they need to calm down. You might even want some tools to help them identify their emotions and express their thoughts and feelings in a healthy way. This might be an area in their bedroom or at the dining table or anywhere that you and your child think is suitable. So what might be useful in this space is, for a younger child, cards with images showing certain emotions. For a slightly older child, maybe some activity books focused around well-being and emotion identification. And for an older child or young teenager, maybe this place could be equipped with some journals and journal prompts or things like stress balls. This isn't the same as something like a naughty corner, which is more about discipline. This is more about acknowledging that there will be times where we will all struggle to cope with our emotions, but one of the most healthy ways to manage is to give yourself some time and space. Work out what it is that you're feeling and then use some healthy coping mechanisms to help you deal with it. People who manage their emotions well have become really good at knowing what they're feeling, and they've figured out what works to help them get through it. So with children, it's always worth helping them through the process. Of course, the emotion management tool that you put in this space will differ from child to child, and it will change as your child develops, so always bear that in mind as well. Tip number 6, don't avoid the situation. Teach them how to deal with it. When a child is really young, they physically struggle to manage their emotions, which is why when they're overwhelmed, they throw tantrums. In the middle of a tantrum is not the time to teach a child huge life lessons, because they physically and psychologically can't process it. So at times like this, it may even be a good idea to distract them or take steps to avoid the situation from escalating in the first place. That's why it's so important to build these lessons into your daily routine. But often what happens is, as a child gets older, they are better able to manage their emotions, but we still avoid dealing with it. This could be because we find emotions difficult to address ourselves, or maybe because we've developed a habit of avoidance, where we take the easy route. But the easy route isn't always the best one long term, so address your child's emotions proactively, adopt some of the techniques I've mentioned in this video, and give it the importance it deserves. Remember, the values that you teach them now will shape the path they take when they're older, so that little bit of discomfort right now is worth it. Tip number 7, create a safe space for them to talk to you, completely judgment-free. Your child needs to know that they can speak to you about anything and everything. That's going to take some work from you to make them feel comfortable. Realistically, there will be some things that your child won't share with you, but that will be because of a choice they've made for whatever reason, not because they fear you or your response. Some ways of doing this might be to encourage open thought and healthy dialogue at the dining table. This is a great opportunity for you as a family to practice how to manage differing opinions and sometimes difficult conversations. But I do think that each child needs to be able to have an individual relationship with their parent as well. Sometimes siblings don't want their business shared with each other, and each child has a right for their privacy to be respected. So have some quiet time with each child every single day. Make it a part of your daily routine. Just catching up with them about how their day was. Show interest, ask questions. My little one doesn't fully get this yet, but my nieces, who are older and into their mid-teens, I'll ask them every time they see them, how was school? What did you do? And then I go in to ask about their subjects, their teachers, their friends. Drop in some stories of your own experiences when you were younger. It humanizes you when it comes to the way they see you, and it makes you so much more accessible to them. It makes them feel important and that their experiences matter. And also, it's a great opportunity for you to identify anything difficult that they might be going through. Tip number 8, teach them an emotion ranking system. This could be where they rate their feelings on a scale of 1 to 10, but more importantly, depending on what they're feeling, ask them to think about, what can I do to bring my mood up or down? So for example, a scale where 1 is calm and 10 is very angry, if they say I'm at a 10, you could ask them, what can we do right now to help bring your anger down to a 6 or a 7? Equally, if a scale is 1 being very sad and 10 is being really happy, and they say they're at a 3, ask what we can do to bring you up to an 8. This could be something that you encourage when they're in the low stimulus space that we spoke about earlier, or it could be incorporated into the children's mindfulness practices, whatever you think is best for your child. But by asking them to think beyond their emotions, to proactively addressing them, you're teaching them how to figure out and develop healthy coping strategies at a very young age. Tip number 9, know that there are a range of emotions. So I touched on this earlier, but as we grow older, our range of emotions increases. And sometimes we might even find that we're experiencing several emotions side by side. Although universally we all share the same basic emotions that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but as we develop, our emotions or how we feel about certain situations can vary from culture to culture. If you're living in a society where the culture is different to the one that you were familiar with growing up, it can sometimes complicate the way you feel about certain situations and then in turn how you deal with them. So it's important to take a moment to understand what it is that you're feeling. I'll link to a video I did on having a daily wellness check-in, which goes through some practical ways that you can start doing this. Sometimes we think that we only operate in a few modes: happy, sad, or anger. But as we develop our own emotional intelligence, we get comfortable with identifying and addressing a range of emotions, which means we're then better able to support our children. Tip number 10. Normalise emotions and the expression of emotions. This may sound basic, but a lot of people have been raised in environments where open expressions of emotions aren't encouraged. You also see this between genders as well, where men are encouraged to suppress their emotions and emasculated if they're seen crying. I'd like to think that we're a generation that's a bit more clued up on how badly this can affect people. But then with that knowledge comes the responsibility of making changes where you see a problem. So some ways that you can normalise emotion is by labelling them, as we spoke about earlier, by being open with your children about how you might be feeling in some situations, by encouraging them to talk about their feelings, and when they have opened up to you about the emotions they've been struggling with, give them some positive affirmations, or at the very least openly acknowledge that emotions can be difficult to speak about and that you appreciate them opening up to you. Tip number 11, model it. Children learn so much more from how we behave than what we say. Work on your own emotional intelligence. Ask yourself how you are when it comes to identifying and managing your own emotions. How do you express yourself when you're feeling upset, angry, frustrated? Really go in and ask yourself these questions, even if they make you feel exposed. We need to have clarity over our own minds before we're able to teach our children anything. If there's work that you need to do, I'll link some video in the description box that might help you as well. Tip number 12. Acknowledge that we don't have a choice about how we feel, but we have a choice about how we choose to act. Never stop teaching your child this basic principle. This is one lesson they will benefit in almost every situation they will ever experience going forward. You often hear in heated situations, "You made me do it," or you might hear, "I was so angry I couldn't help it." Teaching them this principle and regularly reminding them is a lesson in accountability. And accountability is one of the most important things that you need to have for success in almost any area of your life. So again, I repeat, we don't have a choice about how we feel, but we have a choice about how we choose to act. Tip number 13, learn empathy. I've done a whole video on how to increase your empathy skills to improve your relationships and career, so I won't go too deep into that right here, but in that video I did mention how having empathy can make you a better parent. If you're able to empathize with your child's emotions, you're better able to foresee any problems they might experience. You can connect with them on a deeper level and you can make them feel safe. You become emotionally available to them and overall develop a much stronger relationship with your child. It's a win-win situation. Tip number 14, know your child. As you'll know, each kid is different, so it's important to ask what are the triggers for your child's outbursts, and also think about it from one child to another. What works for this child in making them feel better? So for example, my daughter gets really upset when my mum leaves our house to go back to her own. So one thing I like to do at this time is to pick her up and give her extra cuddles, because I suppose if I'm employing empathy, she's upset because she's experiencing some kind of loss in that moment. So in that moment, I'll provide her with something like cuddles or a cup of water. We might get up and do some dancing and have our own little party. Replacing the loss with a healthy distraction technique teaches the child that the loss that they're feeling is still going to happen. And yes, you can be upset about it, but there are things that we can do to manage the feeling instead. If your child is older, just ask them what their triggers are and also ask them what makes them feel better. Tip number 15, teach them mindfulness. Mindfulness is a brilliant practice to identify and manage emotions, as well as being a healthy coping mechanism. It's great when you use it proactively or reactively, so I really can't recommend it enough. I've done a video on mindfulness techniques for depression and anxiety, but let me know if you'd like to see one specifically for children. Tip number 16. Give your child some space and acknowledge that sometimes you might need some space too. Sometimes when we're experiencing strong emotions, we too need some space to just feel the feelings and understand our thoughts before we come back and deal with it. This is no different for our kids. Don't be all over them, especially if they're older. If they're older, it's easier to explain that we just need to take some time to calm down and get our head clear, but we can talk when we're ready. This one builds on from knowing your own emotions and from modeling the emotions, so it's kind of 2 in 1. The next tip is about tantrums. You might just need to accept that there are some times that they will have tantrums, despite all the work that we put in. We can teach them, but at times when their emotions are too extreme, they may just need to release it in an explosive way. Your job in this scenario is to keep them safe. you need to know that it's perfectly normal. The work that you're doing should minimize how often things get bad, and hopefully, even when they are bad, they won't be as bad as they would have been if you hadn't been teaching them all of these lessons along the way. They aren't always going to get it right, so just by acknowledging that home is a safe space for them gives them the security that they need, and also hopefully should stop you from feeling like your efforts aren't working. So those were 17 tips on how to teach your children to identify and manage their emotions. Let me know in the comments sections which one of these tips you'll be taking into your relationship with your child, and share with the community if you have any tips that have worked for you in the past. For more content on mental health, productivity and lifestyle, make sure to hit the subscribe button. That's it from me for now, and I'll see you in my next one.